I don't really have any political experience because the main thing that I do politically is I show up to vote. I vote Democrat. I'm what they refer to as a yellow dog Democrat. I vote for a Democrat. One time in my life I voted for a Republican, and it was Richard Nixon. And I said, after that, after Watergate, I said I'd never vote for another Republican the rest of my life. And I've stuck to it. Business, professional background. I've owned my own business. I've worked for years, but I always worked in business in jobs that were commission based, where you didn't have retirement, and I really never thought about retirement or Social Security until I got closer to getting Social Security. But I believe the purpose of the government is to make people's lives better. And right now we're going through some terrible times. There's a lot of negative things being said that are. The reason I went down and filed at Austin, and I did it with my own money, is because I feel like what's going on right now is really stepping on my toes. In my family, my niece came home the other day and asked her mother if President Trump was going to send her to Mexico. And all this ugly talk that's going around about immigrants being murderers and rapists and drug dealers and terrorists, it comes back on people who are already here, that were born here, that have every right to be here. When Stephen F. Austin came to Texas, the rivers were already Guadalupe and Brazos, and San Antonio was already named, Corpus Christi. People from Mexico, or it wasn't Mexico then, it was part of Spain, just like we were part of Spain. They have a right to be here. Some of those people fought in that war for independence right alongside people from Texas. You know, the name Juan Seguin. Seguin's named for a man who fought on our side during that war because they didn't want to pay taxes to somebody in Spain for land they owned here. So I want people to know that when you let somebody say ugly things about other people, that it comes back on the people that in your family. Some of the things that are being said about life was better. I think one man said life was better when women couldn't vote, which is a really backwards way of looking at things. But if you don't vote in an election, you've just given up your rights to somebody else to decide your life for you. So I'm hoping that people who, whatever they are or whatever they think they are, will get out and vote, because it's very important. People have fought for it, and people have died for it, and I would like to see people understand that some of these issues are, you can say that there's no right or wrong, but if somebody gets up in front of you and says that somebody walking down the street carrying a Nazi flag is an okay person, and there's more than one way to look at things, it's not okay. Not okay to do that. So it's not okay with me. But other than that, I know what it was like. I remember I was a little girl during segregation, and I never appreciated how bad that was for people, because when I was small, all the schools I went to, and my dad was in the military, so we were all over the country. All the schools were segregated. All the churches were segregated. And the fact that people couldn't vote made them invisible, because they had no rights at all. They had nothing except what somebody else would allow them to do. And it puts you in in a position where you're working hard and you're trying to take care of your family, and you never can get out of the hole you're in. So I just would like to see people understand how important it is for you to know your history and to know we all have a right to be here. So I know that everything I have, I didn't pick my parents. I didn't pick the place I was born. I didn't pick the color of my skin. And I think that people that make judgments about other people without having any compassion or any understanding, they just are very short-sighted people. I think the top three things that we need to deal with are public education, which needs more funding from the state of Texas. They've been cutting back on their funding for years and forcing the people, local property owners, to pick up the difference by paying higher taxes. And there are several different ways that they can come up with that money. I'm not sure it isn't already right there in their budget. They're just using it for something else. But the state of Texas needs to pay their share. And this voucher idea, I think, is another pathway back to segregation, where you can pull your children out of school and put them in a private school because you don't want your children to go to school with other people's children. So if you want to take your children and put them in a private school or a church school, you ought to pay for it yourself. And I shouldn't have to pay for it. But and then the second thing is the Medicaid expansion. Texas refused the Medicaid expansion. And over 10 years, that's going to cost us $100 billion of our own money that we paid into the federal government, and they would have given it back to us to fund additions to Medicaid. When you don't have that money, poor people who cannot afford to see a doctor, they delay any kind of preventive care. People who are diabetic and people who have really bad cancer or whatever, and they wind up in an emergency room. And we still pay that money, because if the hospital doesn't have any, they don't have insurance, the hospital is still required to take care of them, and then the state of Texas has to give them the money back. And right now, people are going around saying that people on Medicaid are lazy drug addicts. Okay, in Texas, 70% of the people in nursing homes are Medicaid patients. And 50% of the children that are born here are Medicaid patients. And everybody in this state that is not a billionaire is one catastrophic illness away from being a Medicaid patient. And Medicaid also funds things like school nurses and therapists for special education classes. And the third thing that I think they need to think about is the idea that we don't need any environmental protections, because big companies, if they're not regulated, they dump toxic stuff out on the ground, in the water, in the air, and they don't clean anything up. There's 53 sites in Texas where there are hazardous waste that hasn't been cleaned up, and a big corporation won't spend any money on cleaning things, or making sure that there's no pollution coming from their company, unless they're required to do it. So. I'm working on, I have a website that I had to hire somebody to do it for me, because the first one I tried to do, they said you could do it yourself. And it was like over my head. So, I am planning on getting out and talking to a lot of people. And where I have, my website has a thing where you can volunteer to help. And I'm planning on referring all the people that want to volunteer to go down to the Democratic Party. We've got very strong Democratic Party right here in the county, and they spend a lot of time on the phone and walking up and down the street and knocking on doors and talking to people, and I think that their help is going to make all the difference. I think that they're with their back, and I think that we can overcome. The main thing with people right now is they just need to understand that all of what's going on is going to affects my family in more than one way, because when you listen to the people, I can't do anything about people in Washington and what they do, because there isn't enough money in the world that I would go to Washington, D.C. and live for 2 or 3 years, and I just wouldn't do it. Now, I can go to Austin. I don't mind going to Austin for 6 months, and I don't mind. I think it's important to work on the local things. But our problem didn't start in Washington. It actually started right here locally. And the problem is that people are not paying attention. I don't know if they're watching Fox News or what's going on, but all of the things, like when the people in Washington they pass the tax cut, which everybody is celebrating, and the people, 80% of that money is going to go to people that are already so rich that that little bit of money ain't even going to make any difference to them. Everybody else's tax cut is temporary. And the first thing that they said when they passed that tax cut is now they're going to fix Medicare and Social Security. And we used to have a joke, about people saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. That's the last thing a farmer ever wants to hear somebody say is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. But when they pass the thing, they're saying they're going to improve Medicare. And one of the plans is to give people a voucher. And I have a pre-existing condition, and I already know what it is. And I was born with it. It runs in my family. So 50% of the people that have my mother's side of the family have a condition that they're born with, and it doesn't really, most times it doesn't really start showing up until you're older. But my children are all affected by the same problem. Okay, if people in Washington decide to give me a voucher to go buy my own insurance, they might as well take a gun and shoot me, because nobody will insure me. When I was divorced, I had a period of years between the time that I was on my husband's insurance and I was old enough to get on Medicare. And that period of time, it was very frightening, because I couldn't afford to be sick, and I had to hope that the whatever problem I had would be delayed. I got bit by a scorpion during that period of time, and I got anaphylactic shock, and I had to go to the emergency room. It cost me $1,200. But if you're uninsurable, you need to understand, and really everybody over 40, you already have a pre-existing condition. You may not know what it is, but if you're over 40, insurance companies don't want to touch you anyway, because you're already on the downhill side of being in good health normally. Sometimes people, their health problems show up sooner, but most people, it's sometime between the time they're 40 and 55. They find out, cancer, first one thing and then another. And it's going to be, the people who don't have insurance, most of the people in this country that don't have insurance, they're not lazy people. They're not unimportant people. They're part of our society, and the purpose of the government is to help instead of make things harder for you.